Okay, we'll just pick up from a little bit what we were doing last time with the cults, and then move in the second half. After the break, we'll move into solutions, the solutions section. We saw last time that David Berkowitz had been basically exposing the criminal history, basically, of the process church, and had been basically showing that this church, what had come out of his work showed that this cult had moved from New York after the Son of Sam killings, and had also enormous power in Hollywood, which in general means that they had power and control in the media. And a lot of stars, a lot of celebrities were involved with their order. We had mentioned also the importance of the work of Alex Constantine. He's done lots of work, but the most important book, I think, is The Covert War Against Rock, which will be it'll give a lot of confirmation about what we're talking about here. He goes into the strange deaths, the strange suicides, controversial sort of deaths of people like Brian Jones, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, Peter Tosh, Jim Morrison, John Lennon, and others. Even of them, we have to look at the deaths of Mark Bolan and Janis Joplin, a lot of strange ritualistic elements there. We have certainly questions about the death of John Lennon. No less, his son Julian has also made some very controversial statements about the fact that he believed that his father was assassinated for political purposes. He doesn't buy into the official story, the official reports. And we saw earlier that even the people who were the relations of the Son of Sam victims also don't believe it. So we might sit at home going, I don't trust the official reports, and then might feel even somewhat self-conscious about that, and then you do your homework and find out that even the closest relatives have the same queries. He goes into, of course, the death of Bob Marley, and shows that that was a murder, and brings out information that hitherto has never been reported. The death of John Lennon, of Jim Morrison, had ritualistic elements, which needs again to be looked into, and why these people are a threat, but also never forgetting that there's just a ritual aspect to this. We're talking cult of Dionysus here. When the Sun King falls, these Sun Kings, Sun Children, the ritual that surrounds them, whether they know it or not, is basically an alchemical one. It's a mimicry. It's like it's based on theater. It's based on ancient ritual, Eleusinian rites from Greece, and much earlier ones. And of course those are themselves patterned on the stars in the heavens. So the sun that rises in the morning as the young sun, rises to its peak as the great hero, and then it falls into the underworld. So there's also a death ritual, which involves, like Samson, the aging process, the losing of the hair, the cutting of the hair, treachery, deception, all sorts of underworld experiences. Death in water is a very alchemical setup or issue. These elements need to be looked at. And also the dates at which these people meet their deaths is also kind of ritualistically important. It should never be forgotten. Jimi Hendrix, as Alex Constantine has pointed out, obviously it can be because these people also become politically active. It's okay when you're part of the bread and circuses, okay, and you're just like a puppet on strings, and you're doing what the system wants, and you're providing entertainment to bedazzle and, as we say, enthrall the masses. But the moment that you start speaking up about political issues, then you become a threat, then you become a danger, because you have now the audience of millions. Remember we spoke about that solar-lunar quality, that we're already subconsciously able to project our own archetypes on some of these people? Well, that can also backfire as far as the establishment is concerned. What happens if that person happens to turn around and then say, I have a higher calling. Now I'm going to use my notoriety for awakening mankind. Now you have a very dangerous situation. And I believe that this was the case certainly the case in Jim Morrison's life. And also you have the issue that if these people are under any form of mind control, there's many kinds of mind control, what happens if that starts to break down? Your victim also can have a breakdown in their conditioning. This has been brought out by Bryce Taylor and Arizona Wilder and others. And at that point you become a liability. This has often happened.
Of course, the Mafia had their hooks into the music business going back to the jukebox wars. And then in World War II, the OSS started up a program called Operation Underworld, which entailed the actual recruitment of key mafia figures to operate in Italy and the United States. Right? And after World War II, they continued this brotherhood between the CIA and the mafia that continues to the present day. Now, under Operation Chaos, I mentioned that all intelligence agencies have been brought into the umbrella program. Well, the mafia was brought into it too because they were central to the music business itself, and they could be used to control and ultimately, in some cases, murder musicians who are outspoken in their opposition to the U.S. government. Jimi Hendrix was killed for two reasons. First of all, he had made statements in the teen press calling for the Black Panthers to go to Washington, D.C. and shoot the place up. Secondly, he had done a benefit for Bobby Seale and the Chicago 8. And that got the attention of the FBI and a program called COINTELPRO, which was a surveillance and assassination program. And it led to the murder of 28 Black Panthers. Tupac Shakur makes 29 because he was a Black Panther. Hendrix linked up with the Black Panthers, and for that reason, he was a dead man.
But we certainly have questions about Michael Hutchence, for instance. And if you thought there was something weird about that death, you always hear about them hanging from some hook in their room and sexual perversions, a typical story that's just made up for the media. It's almost like they have to wheel that out every time. And again, all the most closest associates go, no way. There's no way that this person would have ever committed suicide. I just had a phone call that day from him, and he was talking about the wonderful holiday he's going to go on, and the new things he's going to buy, and the new girlfriend that's in his life. Next minute, he's dead. They find him hanging from the ceiling in his room. I mean, come on. Interesting in connection with him is that he was married at one time to Paula Yates, another blonde media individual. But the interesting thing there, and I actually closely tracked this particular incident through the years, and of course she went on and became the wife of this loathsome creature who dare call himself Irish. It's another travesty enough. Actually, he's Canadian-born Illuminati puppet, Bob Geldof. And I think he was implicated in the death of Hutchence. It's a long story. I'd love to be able to have time to get into it. But these people have protection. And if they have something against you, they can call upon their henchmen to commit crimes in their names and have it all covered up once you have those connections, those high-level connections. Favors will be done. You do a lot of favors for them, and you'll have favors done for you as well. This is, if you watch that murder, if you watch the movie we recommended last time, Murder by Decree, or you watch Brotherhood of the Bell, some of the movies I've been referencing, you'll see exactly what I mean there. And it's pretty interesting that a lot of these people who meet their death, either a short time before or for extended periods in their life, did know a blonde female, which we've pointed out is a ritualistic element. And those blonde females then may go on to greater fame, actually. Or in the case of Paula Yates, move on to other celebrities. It's just a pattern. You have to look at all of these patterns. You can't really say for sure, but you need to look at certain things. Or there's evidence that some of these suicides celebrities are directly connected to sinister organizations. This is the case with River Phoenix, who is a part of the organization, the Children of God, which is, by the way, an offshoot of the Jesus movement. Remember we said watch the names, because something that's called this now might have changed its name. You have to do the homework. And in fact, the leader of the Children of God is a guy called David Moses Berg, was himself investigated for what? Child abuse. And actually went and hid out with Gaddafi in Libya when he was being hunted. And there's also another group you should research called the Finders. Lots of groups, the Finders, the Jesus movement, the Children of God. And even the names of some of these celebrities are obviously not their real names. They are talismanic names, they're ritualistic names. A lot of terms are used, like butterfly, like dandelion, like phoenix. These are ritualistic names, which not only tell you about their rank within these weird rites and cults, Kaloum, for instance, but they can also indicate rank. We have questions about Heath Ledger and the swift decline. These are just a few examples. We could sit here for 3 hours going through the entire suicide list of celebrities. Bizarre ones. We have Jonathan Brandis. What will happen is when the mind control breaks down or the real personality starts to leak out, it's then that they come along and tell you, oh, this person has personality disorders, like they did with Michael Jackson. No, what's actually happening is his real personality is probably struggling to get free. That's when they come in and tell you, oh, he's having a breakdown. They did this with Elvis. As we showed in Architects of Control, we had a clip on Elvis and the decline and how it paralleled the movement of the sun into the underworld. I mean, he even wore the symbol of the sun. And many of the references that he made, which are rather cryptic actually, once you understood their esoteric significance, then you realize what I'm talking about. But this was even picked up officially by the great art critic and literary critic Camille Paglia, anyone who's read her works or her essays. And these are expert symbolists. She had already picked up on this motif of the tie-in to the sun cult and the symbolism of the sun. But there's many famous people whose daughters or sons, for some strange reason, have committed suicide. Here's a short list. You notice Andrew Koenig, the son of Walter Koenig from Star Trek, and other famous names. I put in parentheses there that some of these people are actually attached to Andy Warhol's weird group, and also some to the Playboy and Penthouse franchises, you see. But each one, I listed these particular ones because they're of great interest ritualistically. If you go onto Wikipedia or go to the net and look up these names, you will find very suggestive information about their death. This one also is particularly interesting, Margot Hemingway, the granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway. Very much caught up in that whole celebrity pigsty. And her cousin runs a psychic hotline, which again, taken individually is not that interesting, but taken collectively, you start seeing a pattern of people involved with the spiritualist movement being an offshoot of the Fabian Society. And in fact, when she started to sort of go a bit crazy, she reported that, she had been abused by her godfather. And again, her family doesn't believe that it was a suicide. Here we have Zachary Selig. They were friends, by the way. Margot Hemingway were very close friends with this guy. And he is one loony guy. If you read up on his... this is his personal logo, by the way. An Egyptian. He's Jewish, but this is an Egyptian eagle or vulture, depending on which tradition you're coming from, and it uses the pyramid. And anyone who knows that the original Judites were very much connected to the Atenists, then these kinds of strange symbolism can be understood. Now this guy, Selig, was actually born in South America, and he professes to be in direct contact with Mexican priests. That's all he'll say about it. And he's in with all the other larger, big Jewish fashion head honchos. Deeply involved in the occult, openly so. House full of weird relics and symbolism, and he's known to have given readings and spiritual advice to many celebrities. So another one of these bizarre, creepy figures to watch out for. We know, of course, about the condition of Michael Jackson, his father's bizarre connections to strange organizations. And you have to feel sorry, but at the same time you have to just question, these are not individual cases, you know. And then, what are their allegiances? Were they themselves abused from childhood so that they go on until the point comes where their mind control breaks down? Are they talented children, these sort of Dionysian children who have special talents, special dates of birth, that these astrological types are aware of, you see? This is, again, going back to how I got into this myself, I started to understand that this astrological sidereal information was being used by the establishment. And then they know that they can put these people on the world stage because they serve an iconic purpose, an archetypal iconic purpose. Recently we heard about Marie Osmond's son, strange death there. We have the suicide of the famous lawyer. Absolutely bizarre. Again, completely out of character. He was the husband of the Dukes of Hazzard pin-up, Catherine Bach. His name was Peter Lopez, found dead on his own lawn with a gunshot wound to the head. Again, that very day he'd been chatting very gregariously to friends. So it totally took everybody by surprise. High-level lawyer. We got to think about, like it says in the Brotherhood of the Bell, what happens if you're going to blow the whistle? What happens if you have a particular conflict with a fellow colleague or worker and they want to get rid of you? Doesn't mean it's always ritualistic, but we have to take each of these cases separately and look at these other elements. This one is obviously bizarre. No different than the recent Polish plane crash with Beverly Eckhart, who dies in 2009, few days after meeting Obama. Why? Because she's pushing for disclosure on 9/11. She's too much of a threat, so suddenly she's done away with. And the fellow who went around to film the Polish plane crash suddenly is stabbed to death in the hotel literally days after the incident because he's the one who's got the footage of the plane crash. Yeah, that's a coincidence. But even then, given time, like we saw the one with Peg Entwistle that I mentioned last time, 20 years later, 30 years later, in some cases 40 years later, somebody on their deathbed makes a confession and says, well, let me tell you something that's been on my mind for a long time. And that's what's just happened now with the Brian Jones death, that habitually has been put before us as just an accident. But in fact now the truth is starting to come out, that there was a murder involved here, and a police cover-up involved in the death of Brian Jones, the blonde, the only blonde member of the Rolling Stones. And as Constantine points out, very similar events, bizarre events surrounding the death of Jimi Hendrix. And always, not always, but in the vast majority of cases, again, around these sort of iconic figures, you have this totemic blonde female, in this case Marianne Faithfull, was very in with the Rolling Stones, and we saw how elite her background was. We have Anita Pallenberg from Sweden, who was not only friends with Jagger, but was at one time, I think, married to Keith Richards, and was a very intimate friend with all of the Rolling Stones. In fact, here she is with Brian Jones. She appeared in the bizarre movie The Performance, which has also ritualistic elements in it. Interestingly, she has a separate controversy because a young man was allegedly had committed suicide in her bedroom. If you go back and look into her, type her name into the internet, you'll find that controversy. This guy, this young man, had blown his own brains out in her bed. And of course it was all covered up as just a suicide and some sort of depressed teen incident, nothing to do with her. She was exonerated. It has astrological aspects to it. The balancing. Aleister Crowley had also mentioned this about the feminine counterpart to the magician. And often that takes on a physical form. His companion was known as the Scarlet Woman. And it was a noted thing at the time that he was going around with these females that in the magical ritual were meant to balance or in some way counterpoint the personality of the male. But of course, we're dealing here with androgyny, like we saw in some of the ads when we first met in March. The advertisements are very much into the concept of androgyny. And that has many elements. It's part of the ritual. But again, even with the death of Sid Vicious, you have the blonde female in proximity. With OJ, you have the blonde female very much tied into the not only drug network, but the underworld. She was very much involved in the underworld, the sinister underworld of the high-class prostitution. Of course, this never came out officially, but you should dig deep and find she was very close friends with Faye Resnick and a lot of shady drug-dealing, pornographic people in the underworld in LA who were protecting her. And you still find the motif today, in recent times. Here we have Agnes Dane and Albert Hammond Jr. So it's still something that goes on today. Here's a very, what I consider, sinister image, by the way, of Sasha Pivovarov with George Harrison. Note that the pose is ritualistic. That's stylized. That's not natural. That's made for camera. The supine, lethargic, pose of the male, and appears to be protecting spirit guardian of the female, is an image that I can show you going back to ancient Egypt, as a matter of fact. And of course, a little time ago, we had the murder of Gianni Versace. It's important to notice these names because, as I said, these people, it's not just that they're lone people. You see, these are part of this international syndicate of families that are very much involved in the alcohol purveyance and drug purveyance, the opium, from years ago, tied very deeply into the royal families of England. Yeah, another character that needs to be looked into is the bizarre Kenneth Unger. He's still around. He was one of the scions of the satanic Dionysian underworld, and was positioned very much in the center of the San Francisco youth culture, basically to infect them with this satanic Luciferian imagery to seduce the kids. And in fact, remember I told you last time we spoke about the fact that Timothy Leary and his little cohorts appeared right in the middle of the Chelsea set. They seduced not only the bands, but also the record producers who they knew would be famous later on. So everywhere you look, you'll find these repulsive creatures right in the middle of the teen group. And this guy, you know, the personality defects of this character are well known. And he was openly involved with the Satanic Church and the process. Here's one of his symbols, which is again interestingly Egyptian, and you have a UFO in it as well. Somebody telling you something there. It's not too different than the poster that was actually released on the death of Jerry Garcia. And members of the Grateful Dead are known to frequent the Bohemian Grove, by the way, or members of the Bohemian Society. And the poster that came out to commemorate Jerry Garcia's death was a giant pyramid with a missing capstone, and it was called Illuminatus on the poster. Unger made Invocation of My Demon Brother, which, guess what, featured Marianne Faithfull and Chris Jagger, Mick's brother. Unger informed Turner, that was the confidant, remember, Jeffrey Turner, who had been investigating a lot of this. Unger informed Turner at length in the 80s about the occult involvement of Tuesday Weld in this ritualistic rock and roll scene. And we have questions about not just the movie making and the music. You also should note that in literature, we talked about Hammer movies and the various slasher films that came out in the 70s. Who's doing that and why? Well, even in literature you have this dark element. Don't forget that Ron L. Hubbard originally was a writer of fiction. Let's look at Stephen King as well, and Clive Barker and people like that. I actually love to hear Clive Barker. I think he's got some very interesting, he's got a brilliant mind and says some very, very fantastic things. And again, I'm into people who are working with the dark side, don't get me wrong. That's very, very valuable, and wherever a person's journey takes them, that's quite legitimate. But then there's another kind of individual who works with the dark side for evil purposes. The dark side is not evil, but how you manipulate it is. That's what the difference is between white and black magic. Black magic is not altogether negative. Black magic is just that kind of magic in the universe that happens without your conscious knowledge. But that can also be very good. There's a lot of magic that happens around you and in your body that you're not aware of consciously. But there's a lot of white magic that is in your face that is very evil. For instance, going to hospital. The whole system we've got is actually a white magical performance, by the way. But it's something you buy into by going to them. You go to the men in white coats. So it's just a way of looking at it. We have John Whiteside Parsons, who is connected to Scientology and to these other orders. He helped design the U.S. Pentagon, which is an occult design. Occultists stepped in to design not only to design it, but to align it. It's actually aligned to stars. It's geomantically placed. He was also instrumental in the creation of the California Institute of Technology. Because not all occultists walk around with black capes They're ensconced right in NASA, right in the Hoover Institute, right in SRI, right in these orgs. Why not? That's where you're going to recruit the next generation, isn't it? And he was a close friend of L. Ron Hubbard. And we said we don't really know it. Is he connected to the Parsons family of Ireland that are elite? Here we have another monstrosity whose movies are full of gratuitous sadism and bizarre ritualistic elements and lots of violence. There's a lot of occult imagery in the films. It again depends on how it's being used and by whom. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative or evil. But this particular creature, and of course David Carradine, turns up dead. Another bizarre death. In the original version of the Satanic Bible, it was actually dedicated to Tuesday Weld. That dedication is now taken out, but in the earlier versions you can see that Anton LaVey, remember we said that he and Weld were closely associated, whereas the Church of Satan leader Michael Aquino was aligned with Madame N. So there was a splitting of the ways at some point. Douglas Hawes says that in the 1972 book Popular Witchcraft, LaVey described his Satanic Bible dedication to Tuesday Weld as part of the magical ritual. In his explanation, LaVey revealed a deep and intimate acquaintanceship with Weld. Here's a picture of Zena LaVey, that's LaVey's wife. Again, the blonde iconic persona that seems to be cropping up time and time again in this area. The eagles appear to be associated with her, according to the reports of Turner and other researchers. Particularly the bizarre and well-known song Hotel California, which is known for its occult subtext. Also the cover design. It's one of the ways I actually got into the subject myself. I don't remember if I mentioned before that I was fascinated with album cover art back in the late 70s and 80s, particularly with the works of Rodney Matthews, Roger Dean, and the group called Hypnosis from England. Their designs, album cover designs, really interested my brother and I, and we made a meticulous study of those album covers, not implicating the bands. You see, the good thing about doing that is you suddenly realize that the band may not even have the faintest idea. This was brought out by Black Sabbath's guitarist Tony Iommi, where he said that, you know, when the upside down or inverted cross was first put on their first album, I mean, these are just guys from Birmingham, you know. Their interest in the occult was merely as any teenagers would be. They were not deeply involved in any of that, but the record company decided to put satanic symbolism in their album. And you can't fight art designers. Anyone who's worked within the music business knows that the art designers have the say. And that's why you have to later on form your own company to get out from under their power, which Bob Dylan's and other people do, you see, to get out of the way of their power. And so they found all of this satanic symbolism being introduced into their album covers. So when we studied this, we made a separation between the wonderful lyrics and the power and the beauty of the music and the people, and the establishment sort of commercial shell around these bands and the imagery. And this very much goes for the Eagles and so many other bands I could mention. In fact, in the song Hotel California, of course, you hear that the hotel is really a metaphor for the world. It can be a metaphor for the mind itself, the soul coming in that can check out any time it likes but can never leave. Is a very bizarre statement which has ritualistic elements. People who are involved in these cults will understand what it means to join something and then never be able to be let go from it. But interestingly, in November 1977, Tuesday Weld appeared for a Times Magazine interview at this very hotel location. It's called the Chateau Marmont, and she was dressed as a witch for that interview. The author of the piece said that she was fast becoming the high priestess of the Weld cult. That's in the original interview. So she appears in the Chateau Marmont, dressed as a witch, and then is introduced as the high priestess of the Weld cult. And if you look up there to the top left, on the balcony there, people have suggested that that is actually a picture of Anton LaVey is standing up there on the balcony. It's never been conclusively proven, but a very bizarre, ritualistic look, as well as the lyrics of that song. Now, people always wonder about the power of these cults. But then all you've got to say to them is, look, we now accept that corporations have so much control, right, ubiquitously throughout the world. So it's sort of like that. We know that the media has control, the corporations control, they control individuals, they control politicians. So what's the difference with it on a little bit different level? The symbolism alone is highly interesting. Virgin Atlantic, it's now called Virgin, is one of the companies whose symbolism to me is very much indicative of cult activity. They are the one company that actually hired a lot of these album cover artists that I'm talking about. Here's their original logo, which has always interested me, and it shows this split female, what's known as a syzygy, and it's a mind control concept. You have the butterfly, the way the twins are positioned is in a posture that's known as the butterfly. You have the tree of life. You have the black heart. The term virgin, which is again means different. It means different than we would use that word. You see, that's a code word within the ritual, the cult. And you have this red dragon. Remember the whole dragon court tie-in to all of this. So why pick those images? You know, very suggestive indeed. And we noticed earlier also that the media is infatuated with this doll-like, mannequin-like image of the female, which ties into that whole idea of the Cagliostro's Egyptian rite, which deals in the sacrifice of the child and what the child represents. And you really do see it in the media today, even in the mottos and the logos. This ties in, of course, to the whole idea of the post-human symbolism, but it's more than just that. Here's another unspeakably bizarre version. And it would be laughable, you know, and in its perversity, except for the fact that we know that billions and billions of dollars go into this. And we also know its effect on young women, young girls, who will do anything to emulate these images. As we said, we may not be able today to get into too much of the post-humanistic stuff, but I think you're all familiar with that concept. We will look at it a little bit in the solution section after the break. But always note it in the media, in the movies, and in the ad copy, particularly involving the female, or what appears to be a female on the surface. Because remember, as we said, male and female are almost, in one sense, different, completely different than what we would say when we say masculine and feminine. Merging man and machine. On the MSAR forum we have a whole page, a whole section on that, mankind's future, where we keep the latest updates on what's happening in this field of transhumanism. Been looking at it for a long, long time. Of course, you look at the ad copy and that lets you know the whole story. Have actually... One thing that you can see is that the technology, the movement towards this transhumanistic person or being is to separate us from nature. It's another emphasis that nature itself is being turned into a simulacra. Wish we had time to discuss this place that I visited in Manchester called the Trafford Mall. Some of these malls look like palaces nowadays. They even have inside the whole roof has clouds and tree-lined, and as evening falls they turn it into stars. This whole idea to bring people out of nature inside to these palatial malls, to say, oh, you don't need real nature anymore, come here. And the working class people of, Trafford and Manchester, they feel like kings just to get, when you park your car, just to get in the front door. It's like walking up the Palace of Versailles, This has subconscious meaning. And then you walk inside, it's all pagan gods and goddesses and murals and all sorts of subliminal motifs and the head of Bacchus and all of this stuff. I wish I could do a whole show on that. I've got loads of photographs, sun discs and Latin phrases and, sacred hearts and what have you. And what effect does this have, Here we are, having the finest of Greece and Rome and symbolism, and half the people have never even having the faintest idea about that kind of history. So why did all that money get spent? What's it all for? Is it to drag you inside a sort of a precursor to the global village, to make nature look less important, faded to grey, and it's this internal, almost pleasure dome type of feel, with all of this Aztec and Egyptian symbolism all over the place? We might look at these ads and not even notice that how pernicious they are. Which iPod are you? What's that? What does that really mean? It's fusing the difference between the human and the technological. All of this is just softening us up. It's tenderizing us for what's to come. Even the numbers, by the way, if you look at 618, do you know how important that number is? Here we have the headless. We looked at this earlier. And we have, again, the splitting of the female body into two. And the lack of a head. Or even much more sinister, the whole idea of blood and what it symbolizes both in a positive and a negative way. To psychopaths, blood is very important. Anyone who's caught my DVD, Weapons of Mass Destruction, we go into it, and even in the end of the Atlantis DVD, we talk about how blood, literally the symbolism of blood, is vitally important to people in cult activity. So is milk, so is semen. You see, they all have these ritualistic elements connected to it. And then the astrotheology, the blatant astrotheology, or let's say perversion of astrotheological motifs. The twisting of the whore virgin concept. You have the sacred and profane love. It's been known from the Renaissance onwards, the higher and lower female. You have the Savior on one side. See, they're using the sacred symbolism of the Salvator, the female as the Savior, as the mediator of nature, or the daughter of Demeter. You see, the one who's meant to spiritually enlighten you, or promise you enlighten you, but then they use the other dark energy of the female, of the La Belle Dame Saint Mercé, the Papillon de Nuit. Mixing up the archetypes to mess you up. You mess with the archetypes, what do you think is going to happen to the stereotypes? Ad copy again that is very cult-like and vampiristic. Or morbid. This preoccupation with death. And this is often is the choice of the actual person. In this case, Bridget West wanted this symbolism. So it's not always that they're posed and told what to do. Sometimes these people are themselves so deeply involved with this occult ritual. And not only what these models wear, or most importantly their family backgrounds, but they'll even go so far as to be emblazoned, literally tattooed with the symbolism of their controllers. There's the symbol of the Habsburg dynasty. It's also a Masonic double-headed eagle. And they're awarded as well for services rendered, as we said. But notice the clothing that they wear and the symbolism it's used, the colors. Here we have the inverted pentagram. And the number 3. And the various poses that these people like to turn up in is also highly suggestive. And drip feeding the minds of the young to say, this is what you need to be, this is who you need to be, this is how you get your fame and your notoriety. It's very, very pernicious. Here's another one, and look what the album cover, or the concert is called, A New Day, which is patently Freemasonic. Here we have some more rap stars. And slowly it's coming out that there are even black lodges. There's even lodges of Freemasonry. I have the link on the forum that even show you that there's now, it's come to light that there are lodges for blacks, specifically only to join. And they will then be using this symbolism to mark status and to let you know who they are. The lightning flash, something to look out for. Here's some lyrics from Jay-Z. It says, "I'd rather die enormous than live dormant. That's how we on it. Live at the main event. I bet a trip to Maui on it. Presidential suites, my residential for the weekend. Confidentially speaking in codes since I sense you peeking." So they're literally telling you in their own words that they have a subtextual going on and that they're using code language. And then, they're telling us that we're crazy believing in conspiracies. And part of that coding is the symbolism, directly. It should never be forgotten. Let's look at a few more here. Royal symbolism, or patently Masonic symbolism here, the number 7 is important. The pyramid, of course. We'll look at a little bit more at that later on. Here it is again. And you just wonder, out of all the hundreds of symbols that can be used, you keep getting this religious symbolism or patently Masonic esoteric symbolism. And this is, I can't remember his name, but this is one of these creepy guys who works in the highest level of fashion photography. His name has just eluded me. But this character has been complained about by all the models that he's photographed for years and years and years, about his sexually deviant behavior and the general creepiness about him. No wonder. And in fact, I even have photographs of this character, I think, wearing a pentagram t-shirt or something, and openly admitting that he was, into the occult or something. But the Skull and Bones is very important because that's a very powerful fraternity connected to the Knights Templar. The single eye has been brought out also. And that hand signal, by the way, is connected to the Jews, or let's just say to the Judites. Here it is on a synagogue, an old Jewish symbol, a blessing symbol of the Spirit of God. And anyone who studied my work knows, again, as I repeat again, the connection, not to the Jews that we know religiously, but to the Judites. There's a difference between these terms and how the Egyptian tie in. And we have to understand also that these signs that they're making is not a joke. They definitely do relate to secret society symbolism. And it's used even in the political domain, of course. It's very interesting how they do it. It's quite a study to find out how adept these people are. Here's a book, The Duncan's Ritual. I think it's online, but you can certainly pick it up, order it online, or see these photographs, these images, to get familiar with some of this stuff so that when it crops up in advertisements and in films, or even on the political stage, by the way, you'll understand it, you'll note it. I think I had mentioned this kind of thing in that they use it in court a lot. These gestures can be used in court, or by the politicians, as I said. Signs of distress and what have you. Here's an interesting one with the Black Pope, Peter Hans Calvenbach, and immediately you see that he's using these hand symbols. Those are not natural poses. Here we go, you see Yeltsin. And again, people look at these as being national poses or political poses. Nothing of the kind. We do it all the time. How many Christians, have used this symbol? Do they realize what the symbol is? That this was actually the symbol in feudal days. There's nothing to do with religion whatsoever. This was purely political. That was the sign that you made when you got on your knees in front of the feudal lord or the feudal baron. in order to ask permission to do this or that or the other. Say, for instance, if you came to get permission to marry, you and your wife would have to kneel in front of the feudal lord, not the priest and not God, but the feudal lord, to be allowed to get married. As Jordan Maxwell has often said, why do you even need a license for that? Well, you do, because you're under control. You're told what to do. And the idea was that a tether, a leather rope or tether, would be placed around your arm, your hands that were held together, so you were a prisoner. You were enslaving yourself. So that is actually the sign of slavery and submission that later on became known religiously. But all of this histrionics is, again, as we know, embellished. It's actually learned. It's a process. We understand that now in certain cases, like in the case of Hitler, that he was groomed, that he used the power of the voice and the power of movement. You know, they're educated in this. It's a form of weaponry. And for those who don't know, yeah, Obama is a Freemason. It was openly admitted. Historically, we've understood that astrology is used in government circles all the time, even though it may have a sort of a... they present it to you in a sort of a banal way. But it's there all right. Not that there's anything wrong with astrology, but it is wrong if you're trying to control humanity by using it. And as we looked at last time, the pyramidical symbols, the solar rays, go straight back to the sign of, straight back to the signs used by Akhenaten. I mean, his most beloved signs. And I'm glad to see that now, and nowadays, people are really getting up to speed on all of this. It's good, but it's a continuing study, you see, because it doesn't just stay one way. Brand new life, new day. What's it all about? And again, the iconic symbolism, especially surrounding the father figure, the animus. Remember we talked about the master-slave relationship? Well, we buy into it as well. These individuals would have no power whatsoever if we weren't archetypally hungry, archetypally emaciated, so that we're so susceptible. And we have the primordial hill, we have the color blue for the blue degrees of Freemasonry, and the Greco-Roman architecture that is found in almost all the cities of the world. And the very idea of a round enclosure like that is hugely important. It represents the female, the protection of the ova, and also the zodiac as well, many different contexts. But when the hero or the father figure stands on that mound, he is representing himself as not only God, but the first God, the primal God, arose from a mound, a primal mound, out of the waters of the abyss in Egyptian symbolism, you see. Many of the stage sets, look at this one that I found. I think this was of the recent Oscars or something like that. Certainly a major, mega award presentation ceremony in America last year. There on the left, and on the right there is a picture of a Masonic floor, Masonic building. So, I mean, come on. There it is again. The coffin. I noticed that coffin on the symbols of in the 12th of July parades in Ireland when the Orange Lodge, you know, would march. It's loaded with these Masonic symbols, and of course being young, you know, like you're 13 or whatever, you know, see the coffin and go, oh, that's cool, what's that? Why has it got a skull on it, you know? And you kind of remember these things. Only later on to really find out what it's all about. That the coffin, the shape of it, is actually a simulacra for the Tree of Life. If you actually put that coffin, the Masonic coffin in here, and just get a picture of the Tree of Life, you'll notice that the Kabbalistic Tree of Life has that outline. So it's just a metaphor. They work this way. And the whole idea that you have to die, you see, to be reborn again, to go up the Tree of Life to find enlightenment. Interesting symbolism there. There's the sign of the Eastern Star, and the color blue for the blue degrees, the ashlar in the center. And the measurements, the dimensions of these Masonic ashlars, which just means altar, are very important. The numbers that they come to and how those numbers can be found all over the media. Such an immense subject to go into. On the left of that picture on the wall there, you see the pyramid, the winged disc, and on the left hand side you see some serpentine symbolism. See that? and then on the right you see the rays of the sun. All based on Judite, to be more proper about it, Judite, Atenist symbolism. Now, I've mentioned in my work so many times that entire cities have been meticulously designed by these same people. You're actually sitting, in most of the cities of the world, including Gothenburg here, you are literally inside a ritual precinct that was meticulously designed based on the movement of the planets and the constellations. Not only that, but the cities themselves, including the buildings that are in those cities, are geomantically positioned, particularly around what's the 33rd parallel of the Earth, and other parallels as well, but the 33rd has been noted. A lot of symbolism has gone into that, a lot of research. I can be contacted for documents on that banks, stately homes, and even events like the assassination of John F. Kennedy, you see, and many other acts of war and violence and strange inaugurations of this and that and the other, signings of declarations happen on certain positions of the Earth. We showed how important London was, and the Process Church, their headquarters was right in the centre of Mayfair, right in the centre of London. London itself having 28 boroughs, which is 28 is the lunar mansions. That's why when you go to those boroughs, as I've done, you'll notice the lunar and solar symbolism right there, but you don't pull back on the canvas and think, oh well, what's that doing over here? Yeah, but where are you standing? If you were able to fly and you go up in the air, you'd see that, oh, this connects to this and this connects to this. Incredible stuff. And we know that this is true because we have the Kingston Zodiac, we have the Somerset Zodiac, we have the Glastonbury Zodiac that can only be noted from the air. Bona fide zodiacs that are acres long, you could never notice it from the ground. And if it wasn't so important, or if these things were not legit, then why did John Dee back in the 1600s have a fascination with the Somerset Zodiac and wanted to even buy the land on which it is? So if it's good enough for those guys, how come it's not good enough for us today to realize there's significance there? Even the Earth is used magically, you see. So the secret society symbols are used by a multiplicity of politicians and theocrats and what have you, because all that stuff about politics and religion is just the front. That's just the circus, the dance macabre that's put on for us. That's the mask. Behind it is the whole occult aspect that we need to become very familiar with. So Protestant or Catholic. Now this creature, there's proof of this, like we said, look, note the contradictions. On paper, this arch-Protestant, he actually went and sold his own cable channel. That's not a program, by the way, it's a cable channel to Rupert Murdoch, who is technically on the opposite side of the political spectrum as Robertson and his gang. So on paper he's always mouthing off vehemently against the opposition and how debauched they are, but behind the scenes they're doing deals, huge billion-dollar deals. There's so many examples of this kind of collusion going on. And then it's just insane how it is that the kind of people that they put forward, in modern times. I mean, to even think that this guy is involved with secret societies or a Mason. If I was a Mason and he joined, I'd leave. They're so bad, I'd want to leave Masonry. If a creature like that said, I want to join. You want somebody like that, higher rank than you? The Sutherlands are an interesting family to look into, not only the movies they've made, but their history. They go back to the Puritans, have a very interesting history. And then of course these media types. Letting you know, and I'm showing you this for a reason, I'm coming to this for a reason. I know a lot of you have probably seen these symbols, are familiar with them, but what you're probably not familiar with or haven't thought about too much is the fact that these symbols are being shown to you obviously. Why? Because that is also part of the ritual. Nothing is done that we don't actually know about in some way. We are being told constantly. That's the most important thing to remember. There's a subtextual occult type of communication happening to you. That makes you part of the ritual. This is how they work. You have one board, but you have black and white squares. You're on that board. You're going to occupy this square or the other. And the elites assume that you are part of their ritual, by the way. Okay, they may treat us like pawns or whatever, But we're still part of the game. This is very important to realize because it's also to do with the retaliation. Once we know that we're part of the game, your movement then becomes very important. How you think becomes more important than you just thinking you're an outsider looking at all of this spectacle. Well, these guys are including you in that ritual, and they're letting you know how it works. Notice the black and white, you see. Symbolism here all the time. And sort of bad boy image. Also, the black tear is a Masonic secret society trope or motif. So this is done to let us know in a way that we're talking to you subtextually, subliminally. Karl Rove. Again, it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum you're on. The Phoenix, as we said, the Process Church, wasn't it? Had it? No, it was the Hellfire Club. Remember? Had changed their name to the Phoenix Society at one point. And there's Chelsea Clinton wearing the inverted pentagram, not the inverted pentagram, the inverted cross, which is a patently Luciferian symbol. Here's the Star of David. And when we realize who the Davids really were, not as they've been presented in front of us, but what that word really alludes to, is again another code name for atomism. You must know this because otherwise we misinterpret the symbols. When these fellows are posing in front of the so-called Israeli flag and seem to be having this Jewish symbolism, we're misreading it completely. Camp David doesn't refer to the Jews, right? And Jews need to know this too. They're the first who need to be told this, so they're the most confused. They're the most mind-controlled of all, thinking that this is to do with their religion. It has nothing to do with their religion, and they need to be aware of this. These are Davidic symbols that refer to the commanders of Aton, the sun cult, who've committed just as many unspeakable acts of criminality, you see, to the Jewish people as they have to the Gentiles. We have a common foe, a common enemy. But that enemy is smart, it's intelligent, it's cunning, it knows how to work one side against the other or two or three sides against each other. When they're using terms like Zion, you see, and Israel, they know what these terms mean. And as I said, I'm showing you these reasons for a point. They're leaving clues to tell us, to involve us in the ritual. And they're going so far nowadays to do this, where they're even making the movies, as we said when we first met in March. They want you to know that now. They want you to literally to know, they want everyone to know that there is this esoteric underpinning to reality. And it's fascinating to see, for me to watch and see how they're doing this. How they're sort of removing the lid. It's just fascinating and why that might be happening and the astrological age we're in and all of this. Almost like taking down the mask, giving us a peek. As JC said, you're peeking now. You're starting to peek, so we have to use the codes. But it's been there in front of us all the time. The clues. Bottom left there you see the symbol of the original Dodge car company. There's the modern one on the right that we all know, which is the symbol of Aries. Aries being the most important house of the zodiac to the Atonists. Anyone who knows about the whole life of Akhenaten and why he came up with Atonism know that it had to do with the movement of the sun between the signs of Taurus and Aries. And this is the movement that caused conflict in Egypt between the groups of priests. And the priests of Heliopolis and Memphis backed Akhenaten, and that's how he was able to create Atonism and do horrors or untold horrors in Egypt. So the ram and all the Aryan symbol pertains directly to the cult of Aton. As does the Star of David, of course, and there you have it in the Egyptian motif with the wings and the Star of David, the Judite connection. The pentagram and the blood circle there for Access Hollywood. Other 3 6s. I'm glad to see people are getting up to speed on that. They're not getting up to speed on what 666 really refers to, by the way. Christians just think it's a sign of Lucifer. First of all, they don't even know what Lucifer is. They have to define that term. What's the difference between Lucifer and Satan? We've done an interview on that on Red Eye's Creations. I've gone into it in the Irish Origins book. 666, very briefly, if you multiply the numbers, it's a triad number. So just from 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, you multiply them and to get one of the meanings. 6 times 6 times 6. You see, 216 becomes a very important number in astrology. These are numbers of the initiates. It's also numbers that are found in the dimensions of the pyramid and the Ark of the Covenant and all of that kind of thing. But this is stylized in so many places. There's a couple of logos that stylize it. Here's how it's done, the Walt Disney logo. And it, in one sense, doesn't really represent anything evil. It just represents something hidden, something occult, something the initiates will understand, sacred knowledge. Even if you add the numbers, right? 6, 6, 6, it's 18. 18 becomes 9. But 9, 18, 27, what do these numbers mean? They refer to something. They refer to the initiated and the non-initiated person on one level. 666 was in the Bible, we find it, and it refers to the number of man, basically. It's a human number, remember? I've gone into the meaning of that as well. Or the swastika, the double-headed eagle. You're finding it all over the place, especially in the purveyance of alcohol and tobacco and these companies, because these are the old pirates, the old scions of these royal figures. The Nike logo has been exposed clearly as being connected to Saturn. And that's a huge story of what Saturn represents, Kronos, and how these symbols, the effect that they have and the meaning that they have. The skull and bones, here we have Stephen King. I mean, that's hardly a natural pose to be in, so what's being told to us here? And also drawing on tarot and astrology, you'd find it in the most bizarre places. Sometimes it's accident, sometimes it's not. But they identify, this is a fusion, a constant fusion between archetype and stereotype. This is how the things of the world get their meaning, get to be attractive to the human mind. If we just believe what's on the surface, well then, that's it. That's ignorance. Here's the poster for the Euro 26. And we notice how similar that is to the effigy of the god Moloch, which some researchers have identified as a secret society emblem, that could be found at the Bohemian Grove and places like that. The fact that it has a bull's head is nothing evil, it's just that these cults come from the age of Taurus. They're astrologically based. Don't forget about the concept of the female again, and the associations of different houses of the zodiac is involved in this. Turn the symbols around, flip them over, rearrange them. Here's a good example. What most people would think is just the ice cream company heart. If you just flip it round, it becomes 33, which is the highest degrees in Freemasonry. So it's just, I'm not saying anything about this company specifically, I'm just saying, let's examine examples of these companies to see if there's any hidden meanings and so on. I brought out in 2006 the idea of this tear or claw mark, and now suddenly you have this company coming out afterwards that literally is making it very clear that that's the case. But the interesting thing about this particular company is that particular rip corresponds with Vav, the Hebrew letter, which corresponds with the number 6. So those 3 tears is actually 666. This is just the way they do it, the way they play. There's the Hebrew letter there. You're reading backwards, Aleph, Beth, Gimel. It's A, B, C, D, see? We get the word alive from the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. It also means breath. You're alive because you breathe. You see, that's the number associated. Bet or Beth means house, so that's connected to the pyramid. The second letter. Gimel is translated in English as camel. The symbol of that letter is a little camel, where you have Camel cigarettes. Yeah. And that can either be a C or a G. We could go. We have a time we could go through all of this amazing stuff. Dalet is the Greek Daleth or Delta, which is the pyramid, which is the triangle. You see, connecting to the female mysteries, and how that turns out the symbolism. He being the symbol of the male. You could go through all of these. It's really interesting. Samek down there. That's where our word stomach comes from. Nun being the goddess of the waters. It's where the German 9 no, nothing, emptiness, no, noon, high noon, we get that word mem. M, the letter M is the only letter that you pronounce with your mouth closed. So in the wartime in Britain, they would say keep mum, right? That's from the Hebrew keep mem, because it means you're holding your lips closed. Well, doesn't that have a lot of meaning when you see these celebrities and rap stars, making the whisper sound or closing the mouth? They're using all of this esoterica just to study the so-called Hebrew alphabet. Shin is actually pronounced shayin, and that is where we get the English word shine, to shine like the sunlight. Resh is where we get a multiplicity of words like red and rex for king, and all the words connecting to royalty. And rush, now there's a new drink out called Rush, which uses this symbolism tweaked slightly. And of course the very famous Yod, the very first letter of the name of God, Yod He Vav He. We're just going to spend so much time on that alone. We have to move on, but here's again the way the 666 is carefully and brilliantly stylized. Here is a folder from a bank in Wells Fargo Bank I picked up, God, it must have been 10 years ago, with Masonic symbols right on it. The hammer, the key, and the rule, but it's open to look like a compass. And there on the top right, those are colors again of the Eastern Star. We looked at how common those colors were in corporate logos, and now you find out where it comes from. It's purely Masonic. Here it is again. Who's really behind Austin Community College? Well, they're telling you in the symbol of the star, the Eastern Star of Freemasonry. There it is in the top right. There can be no doubt about it. After you've listened to like 2 hours of Jordan Maxwell talking about the black robes and the mortar boards and all the rest of it, and then even the word degree, right, and the ram's skin that they often used to give you to put around your shoulders and all the rest of it, how can we be in any doubt? The very word graduate. More corporate logos directly out of Freemasonry. It's in architecture. Go around San Diego, go around LA, and you'll see the symbols. And the very architecture is Templar design. And the hidden symbolism. Here's a cover I photographed of a local in Hayward Community College, loaded with keyholes, pyramids, Cross of Lorraine. So many Masonic symbols right there on the front cover of this magazine that's given out to the students. The idea of even having 3 branches of government is purely based on the Druidic symbol. And you find this in schools, colleges, libraries, all over the place. The division into 3. As I said, they tell us in this whole symbolic language. Here you have the Bush holding the Book of America upside down. He's reading a goat story. And in the back you have the U.S. Constitution. The network of families we've been talking about were very much involved in, as I said, they actually were pirates, basically. Where does that word come from? Pyra, the men of fire. They worked for the British government. They were under the tutelage of the Spencer family, the Drake family, the Cabot Lodge family, and the Cecil family. Ogilvy is another one. Remember, David Ogilvy is one of that family. He was one of the most important advertisers in Madison Avenue. Well, his brothers are royal. His family goes back to the Secret Service, back in the time of the Queen Elizabeth I. And these pirates are still around today. All of the symbolism pertains to their family line. It may be put before you in a comedic way, but when you understand that these pirate families were not only behind the erection of the Ivy League schools, not to teach you, but to teach their sons and daughters, that they knew we need to educate these creatures. Our sons and daughters need to go on to run the empire, we'll leave for them. So that was how the universities and colleges got started, and that's how the fraternity lodges within these, the fraternities within these universities are there, so that there's a graduation, you see. But this goes for Menzies, Sinclair, Bacardi, Guinness. So many families that are in the world today, including all these fashion families and the perfumery, are all part of this gigantic pirate network. This is a band, the Lords of the New Church, that I've been studying for a while. I think they're very tied up in a lot of satanic stuff. Again, it's my personal opinion. And you just keep noticing the symbolism. Here's Rihanna. with the skull and bones and the rose motif tattoo. And of course it pertains, one of the most important lodges, as we know, is the Skull and Bones, which is ensconced at Yale University. It was actually set up by this man, Daniel Coit Gilman, who lived between 1831 and 1908. He was a so-called educator, an academician who was instrumental in founding the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale College, and who subsequently served as one of the earliest presidents of the University of California, the first president of the Johns Hopkins University, and as founding president of the Carnegie Institution. He was also co-founder of the Russell Trust Association, which administers the business affairs of Yale Skull and Bone Society. The Skull and Bone Society is a branch or wing of the Russell Trust, and that's a very important organization to study. We said we'd be mentioning the names. Well, this is one of the most important of all. The Russell family and the Russell Trust. It's a wing itself of the British East India Company. Because on the western side it was known as the Hudson Bay Company, the Virginia Company, the Massachusetts Bay Company. And just go into all the so-called founding fathers who drew up that American Constitution. I mean, all of them were members of these corporations that I'm mentioning. British money was in their pockets. There's a lot of information in my article called The Constitution Con, because that's exactly what it was. Their number of the Skull and Bones order is 322. Well, that just happens to refer not only to, again, the sign of Aries, right? 3 March 22nd, the very day that the sun moves into Aries in the normal astrological zodiac. I find that infinitely interesting. But it also refers to chapter 3, verse 22 of the book of Genesis. And what is that verse? And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. So this chapter, verse, is about not only the fall of man, his banishment from the Garden of Eden, the rivalry that he had with the gods for knowledge, that man was actually due that knowledge, but it was hidden from him, that the gods, plural, that alone is dynamite, conspired to keep from man sacred knowledge, and have kept him in ignorance and prevented him from returning to his natural state, penalizing him for a sin that he didn't even know was a sin. And by the way, Eve wasn't even born when the prohibition against the apple, the tree, was made by God. Eve being formed from Adam's rib comes after God has made the prohibition. How innocent can you get? You weren't even born yet and you're being penalized for the crime? Anyway, speaking of strange symbols, here we ask, why is a skull and bone symbol to be found on the tunic of a member of the Knights of Columbus, a Jesuit Catholic order to which many U.S. politicians and public figures belong? The Knights of Columbus. Huge story there. But they're Catholic. I thought everybody at Yale, was meant to be Protestant. Incredible. But you have to watch where it turns up, even in the so-called alternative community. There it is, chapter 322, March 22nd. The very day that the sun rises into the sign of Aries. Oh, what's it doing here on a Nike ad? See there in the flames on the left? I've noticed this on so many TV programs, 322. If you get to the movie Independence Day, briefly it's either the Gene Hackman character or one of the other characters just pulls back his digital watch. It's just like a instant. It's before the feds sort of crash in and try to arrest them and destroy their premises. Somebody looks at a watch and it says 322. You'll catch this in so many movies.
Good evening, sir. Happens to be 3 a.m. When do you sleep, 007?
The American CIA sent a man down to work the Strangways. A fellow by the name of Leiter. Do you know him?
I heard of him, but never met him. Has he found out anything? Anything important?
You'd better ask him. You're booked on the 7 o'clock plane to Kingston, and that gives you exactly 3 hours, 22 minutes.
And that's the way that the director is letting you know some more information. I mean, what does this possibly have to do with literally nothing? So it's symbolic. Here it is again with the Malta cross behind it and the Constantine motto, "In this sign you will conquer." Here we notice the checkerboard, and on her belt you see the Celtic sun cross. Because as we said, the Tuesday Well cult, remember, the process cult is very much into Druidic, pseudo-Druidism of course, but Druidic nevertheless. Here's Masonic G. Here it is again. Happy or depressed, don't leave home without your checkered shirt. We showed some James Bond symbolism earlier on. Here we have the sort of mannequin, dazed, hypnotized look, or I've had a long weekend look. But these depressive looks can also be, from something else. The jadedness, what's happening inside that person, must also be taken into account by being involved in all of this. Various colors, suggestive symbolism, all over the modern media today. Here it is in the genetics field, Craig Venter. Absolutely Masonic. Here it is again. I mean, this is a no-brainer. There on the right, you have, I think it's the first degree initiation of the rolled-up trouser leg malarkey, and that actually rope around your neck is the origin of why men wear the tie, by the way. That is the tie that hangs you, or ties you to the commercial world that's controlled by Freemasonry. And then when they write you off the square, say you've just become sort of recalcitrant, and you go in front of the judge, in English courts, I don't know if you have it here, but in England, when you were going to serve the death penalty, the judge would pull out a black square. It was actually known as the black cap, the cap of death, and that would be placed meticulously on the judge's head. A black square, Masonic square, because now, they're telling the victim that he doesn't know, you've been under our law, maritime law, but now since you've become renegade, we're wiping you off the slate. You're no longer a debtor. We're removing you from the board game, our board game, in which you are on the debt of the country. Because it's debtor and creditor in court, nothing to do with defendant plaintiff like we think. And even the rituals of erasing you are very Masonic. It's interesting that. Tarot cards, we saw earlier on with the John Travolta pose. Somebody knows something and it isn't John Travolta. Here we have the same hanged man idea. And we saw last time we met Madonna, positioned as the Queen of Swords, you see. And generically, the Mercedes symbol, by the way, is an old alchemical symbol about squaring the circle. You have to look at the image three-dimensionally. We don't have time to do that, but it's actually a cube inside a circle, inside a sphere, is what it is. And originally it used to be 3 interlocking circles. Before Mercedes chose that symbol, it used to be the famous 3 interlocking circles known as the Triskelion, or the... Here we find it all over America in banks and real estate companies. You find the checkerboard. I mean, what's that? Is this a checkerboard? I mean, how Masonic can you get? But again, once you put all these pieces together, none of this is in the remotest bit confusing anymore, you see. It's just after you've done your homework and you've got familiar. This is like so familiar. But the sinister thing is, it turns up, these very similars in colors turn up in the world of children. There it is for Cartoon Network, one of the biggest networks, television networks for children's cartoons. And I mean, not only are these cartoons that they show the kids so sick, but they're absolutely loaded with supernatural and Luciferian symbolism. Album covers, bands like this. What's this all about? You won't ever crack it until you understand the power of this Dionysian, specifically the Dionysian cult that works with androgyny and works with sacrifice. Here's a band that I've always found very sinister, as I said, the Lords of the New Church. The Doorway to the Light. This is a well-known Masonic idea. And the death that you have to go through, the symbolic death that you have to go through, crossing the floor. And the black and white squares just representing in one level ignorance and knowledge. Here's Bridget West again. Masonic symbolism. There's a band, their poster is Masonic. And the chant, where does that word come from? Who chants? You go up to Untermeyer Park, you'll see who chants. Here's Blondie, again, the tie-in. Remember I said that a lot of these blonde women are really a simulacra, a stand-in for the occult priestess. It's kind of curious symbolism. I've always thought that Debbie Harry, she's not a natural blonde, by the way, so I always found it kind of interesting that she was so physically similar. And if ever, I don't know, you probably all have your favorites and everything, but in my mind, I couldn't even imagine a more projective person, somebody who takes the projections, you know, when you study projection, to me, Debbie Harry, her whole persona is so yin. I mean, this is perfect occult ritual type of person who just, you can just look at for hours without you even knowing it. It's partly erotic, it's partly idol worship, it's fascination, it's all of this allure, you know, this whole cult of mystique, which is partly female or feminine, but infinitely more. And in her, in my eyes, you can really see this ritualistic element at work. Of course, other people will say, no, it's this person or that person has it more. Elvis or even James Dean. It's all a different kaleidoscopic attitude. But I sense the ritualistic element in all of this because there's such a tremendous resemblance between Debbie Harry and Tuesday Weld. And of course, that priestess then will be positioned in different ways. You know, the punk movement, the countercultural movement, they're everywhere. They're all one person, one priestess, one archetype, but several different stereotypes. You find it whistleblown in the movie with Janet Leigh and Lawrence Harvey, Manchurian Candidate. They're literally telling you there that the symbolism involving deep mind control and how that is done via the female, the blonde female, or how the blonde female plays a part in that process. There's many whistleblowing movies that directly bear on this. None better than this film, which I hope everyone will get, The Green, Woman in Green. I still yet to find a movie that whistleblows what we're talking about better than this. It's a beautifully made movie as well, as was many in this series. Some were made during the war years, so they're a little bit propaganda-based, but those are just mostly the tacked-on endings. If you watch the movies with an occult eye, you'll be absolutely amazed. The only thing is that I've recommended these series of movies before to people, and they don't see it because the symbolism that's in the series is so subtle and so brilliant and so elaborate, it still has yet to be cracked. I hope in the future I'll be able to do a more deeper work just on this series, including this phenomenal movie, but just get this if you can.
He killed Holmes! He killed Philip! Watson. You? But I saw him shoot you a second ago.
Not me, my dear fellow. Elizabeth to Julius Caesar. Incidentally, you may have noticed that all through the ages, prominent men have prominent noses.
Not you. Corporal Williams, Middlesex Regiment. Discharged from the army as physically unfit. People seem in order.
Now, Corporal Williams, you've seen service in the Far East, haven't you?
The East.
I thought so. Look at his complexion, Watson. Yellow as saffron. He's been taking attebrine. Cure for malaria. Sniper, aren't you?
Sniper.
Why did you try to kill me?
I had to kill him. I had to. Oh, snap out of it.
Stop it, Watson.
He's shamming.
No, he isn't. Who told you to kill me?
She told me.
She told you?
She told me I couldn't miss. Well, luckily you did miss, you murderer.
Isn't a murderer, Watson. Listen, Corporal Williams. She told you you had to do it, didn't she?
I had to do it.
I've got it, Watson, I've got it.
Got what?
The method used in the finger murders.
Well, what is it?
Hypnotism, my dear fellow. Hypnotism. And it wasn't against his nature. That's the devilish part of it. They picked a man for that purpose whose job Smite. Who are they? Professor Moriarty and his finger murderers. Williams spoke of a woman. I think you'll find that she asked him home tonight for a drink. Nice quiet rooms, soft lights, music.
You got it all pat, Mr. Holmes. What's the lady look like?
Up 30, nice figure, blonde, lustrous eyes.
Here we have again the 666 in the eye. Again, the doves. The columns, right? The mannequin, the one eye closed, the one eye open. The gun, she's holding her hands like not only the religious symbol that is used in Masonry and also in the Vatican as allegiance, but it's also Baphomet, the occult icon of the Templars. I mean, what have they left out? Anything? Here again. What is all this? I mean, does anybody ever ask a question? But then you have the serpentine imagery, which is commonly brought in a lot. We've already looked at that. Look at this again. The colors. We know where those colors come from and how common they are used in religious symbolism. There's Natalie Portman, the model. Python is the actual snake, or the name at least, that was used at the Oracle of Delphi. The priestess was called Pythonia. Pythonia was connected to the female oracle. She lived in the caves underneath Delphi and would come out when there was enough smoke, and often in the night, to come out and give prophecies and readings, spending most of their time in the dark, in the underworld, so that the unconscious mind works more, the melatonin is not as destroyed, you see. And the symbol of the python literally represented that. Pythagoras, the very word Pythagoras, means I am the python priest, the clairvoyant, the wise one. Of course, we know it's also a symbol of the Kundalini as well. This guy's making the symbol, I think it's of Osiris slain. I'm not sure, I'm pretty much sure it's a symbol of Osiris slain. It may be wrong there. It might be the symbol of Osiris risen. I have to double check that. Or it can be a stylized serpent, as in this case. Where does it come from? Again, not only from Greece, but much earlier than that. The symbol of the earth god is either known as Seb or Jeb or Geb. It's one of the people, one or two books think that the name of the serpent god being Jeb is where the Masonic G comes from. That's one origin of the Masonic G. I disagree. I thought that myself for a long time, until I went further and found out that it actually refers to the Gaionum, the elite princes of light that hide behind Masonry and are once upon a time connected to the group you may be familiar with, the Sadducees. Elite Sadducees, elite Pharisees. Their elite schools are called the Gaion or the Gaionum. I've gone into that in great detail in the Irish Origins book and DVD. Here it is again, the symbol of the serpent. And the whole idea of enclosure, and the whole idea of the precinct, the sacred precinct, that there's an inner wisdom and an outer wisdom. And the old genetic sorcerers who've been moving technology forward, they're still using the symbolism that pertains to their cult and their order. Here it is in the Sun microsystem symbol and various others. Pepsi being the Egyptian name for the devil, Pepa, or Apep, or Apophis, or Pepsa. Very, very ancient name. There's one of the original symbols, a purely astrological. Urania, or Spica, Virgo. But if she's holding the earth, it's often Urania, the heavens, the heavenly goddess. It can be stylized again. The serpent can be stylized in various ways to look like the Eye of Horus. Here we have it stylized again with a S. Here we have it stylized. It's clearly a serpent, but this one refers to a group of off-world dragons, right? The Superman movies, especially the original ones, clearly show you that this is a world of immortals who use all forms of crystalline technology and super advanced computers and have power, great spiritual power like the adepts of old in the mythologies of the world. But the S is interesting. This is an example I want you to look at to show you how clever and brilliant these designers are. Jinn is known to Arabic scholars as being the race of demons or cherubim, the sort of spiritual daemonic. I don't mean demonic, but daemonic agencies is the jinn, right? On the J and the I are styled to look like a man, but the undulations of the two ends looks like a dragon man. See how well that's done? And there you have the DNA spiral as well, which people who are familiar with my Atlantis work will really note that why it's important that the man is connected to the dragon. A really incredible logo, that. Sobe is a play on the Egyptian Sobek, who was the friendly crocodile god, the friendly guardian, the original Holy Spirit. Did you know that the earliest version of the Holy Spirit was actually Sobek, the crocodile god? What's it doing on a product with little lizards? Because they know the Egyptian symbolism, and they know that your subconscious understands that that word refers to the Holy Spirit. So when you're drinking in that product, there's a whole occult thing going on. I mean, this would be a lunatic lecture if this didn't have the most imminent consequences to our lives. That's not an English word. Where did it come from? Even the O is stylized not only like the symbol of the sun in astrology, but like the female breast is that shape. S is the most subliminal of all of the terms of the English language. They've even made the little reptiles there look like the yin yang. So many aspects to this. These guys have more right to use the dragon because they are connected to that lineage. Bacardi. David Icke had pointed out in one of his books that the British Telecom man is not only Pan or Mercury or whatever, but the red part of his body there, the arm leading down to the leg, is the serpent, the red serpent. CNN not only has the serpentine undulations, but the very word, if you put the vowels back, Khan, means serpent in Hebrew and many other languages. Canaan, Khan, what do you got down in the south of France? Can, right? Those are all words. Cohen, Kieran, those are words that directly mean the serpent. And of course, Pepsi were big behind the Obama presidency. Their new logo looks like the eye of a dragon. It's a stylized eye. Here are symbols that were made for the Queen of England, and they actually are in Buckingham Palace. They're directly linked to an order known as the Order of the Garter. I put them here because you can do it the other way. You can first, like I said about the Duncan's ritual, go to the Masonic books, go to that literature, learn what their symbols are first, right? And then go out into the public world and note them. I kind of did a bit of both. I started partly with the world of album covers and movies and rock videos, and then then got into the esoteric. But a lot of it was also, I was familiar with the esoteric, and it took me some time to connect the two. So there's no rules. You can find it whatever way you want. Look at the serpent there. Look at the dove. Look at I think they have an owl, yeah. Bohemian Grove, and the lion. And yet these are not just royal symbols. These are symbols that are directly related to the Order of the Garter, which along with the Order of St. Michael and St. George is one of the most elite orders in the world. Those boys control it all. And the Order of the Garter itself goes back to Egypt and to the worship of the god Set, who's the Egyptian version of Satan in many traditions, you see. You have the phoenix as well. Very, very interesting stuff. Here's a typical Masonic tombstone. Go up here to Riedbergsplatsen. I'll teach you Swedish yet. I think it's Redbergsplatsen in English, but Riedbergsplatsen over there, they have the big graveyard that I've noticed, loaded with the elite families of Göteborg that are buried up there. Just take a camera and go up there one day. It's unbelievable. I said I'd learned 2 Swedish words while I was here. What was it? Told a friend, kakkerlacker and schuckling. I'll take those back with me. And he goes, you shouldn't speak bad of Swedish politicians that way, you know. Learn how to say something better about them. Anyway, it says, yeah, the brazen serpent. The protecting archon, basically. Here it is on a symbol that was actually one of the national symbols of America. Did you know that this was going to be on the dollar bill? I mean, this was literally one. They had the pyramid and they were surrounded by serpents. And it goes all back to this dragon court of ancient times. Very ancient symbols. This is an old Irish or Scottish Pictish showing not only the Malta cross, the swastika and the serpents. So it's very, very ancient. Then you turn and say, look, here's a perfect example, right? Say you're studying this stuff and you come across these logos like the one on the right, and you're walking down the street one day and you see an Alfa Romeo, you know, or whatever, or a bank or something like that. And you go, look, wait a minute. Now you see one or two and you'll never, like most people in the world, they never make the connection. But eventually a point will come where, you know, you're going to see so much of this that you're going to start asking these questions. And it's a perfectly legitimate study. Just because they don't teach it in school doesn't make that any less true. Here's a emblem of the Thule Society of Germany, showing the skull, the swastika, and the serpents, and the oak leaves. Serpents, you see. There's the 4 letters of the name of Jehovah. It runs left to right. Yod, He, Vav, He is the name of God or Jehovah or Yahweh. And there you see the enclosing serpent and then the Masonic compass and rule. And the leaves of the tree of life. The old Druidic pagan tie-in. Here is, you might be familiar with the symbol on the right, which is the Texaco company. Not only is it a T and the pentagram, if you study a lot of Celtic or Irish megaliths from the air, and you look at the chamber that goes in, like Newgrange, that's what it looks like. They're called cuneiform, you know, they have the cruciform interior chambers. So that is also a symbol for those who've studied ancient megaliths. Looking down, that's the shape that they are. Often designed on the pentagram shape, often with this T-shaped interior. Newgrange is a perfect example. The same company on the left, this is a different logo, see how serpentine it is. And it's actually called Hydro Texaco. Hydro is Hydra, the serpent. The famous Hydra is the 7-headed serpent. Go to the Masons themselves and you'll notice where all of this is coming from. One of the highest degrees, the 25th degree, is actually known as the Knight of the Brazen Serpent. But even the Knight Kadosh, they're at the 30th degree, you see. There's lots of meaning behind all of that. And just the very, I pointed out this in the Brotherhood of Death interviews and many others, that just the fact that there's so many Judite the terminology. You know. Look, Knight of the Sun, there's one. The Royal Axe, the Rose Cross, and the Knight of the Brazen Serpent, the Knight of the Gleaming Serpent, the Bright Serpent. And as we pointed out before, here you have it. The royal dynasties are clearly part of that so-called Dragon Brotherhood or Dragon Court. I mean, to me it's almost crazy, you know, you're born, you're named. They always give their sons and daughters the names of previous kings. It's like, oh, okay, that's great. You grow up and you're actually named after the previous psychopaths. Here's a couple I just noticed in the last couple of weeks. An online site. And you not only have the mushrooms, which remember is the Dionysian mushroom cult. You have the trees of life, you have the sacred female, and you have the lizard reptilian symbol in the foreground and some other weird flora there. Really fascinating. And again, we just want to get to the point that we're rounding up this section about the rewards for the lackeys. These are Wilhelm Reich's little men. But the fact that you see them in proximity to the royals is also very alarming. And these awards are a signal to the rest of the people coming up. Do as they do and you will be taken care of. And so you have left-wingers and right-wingers, right? Gentiles and Jews and all sorts of people joining the same orders. How can Göring and von Papen from the Nazi Party be members of the same order that Nelson Mandela, a so-called left-winger, is a member of? Hasn't Mandela shown some, say, I'm not going to join this order, look who the guys are. No, they're joined right away. Because they know what you don't know. I think David Trimble here on the left actually gave his award up. I'm not sure, I still have to look into his biography. They are telling you themselves the very symbol of the Fabian society is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The very word Fabian refers to Fabius, the Roman general who, through a gradual process, right, that David Icke talks about, the totalitarian tiptoe. The Trojan horse methodology of how you control the human race and the human mind. Not openly. In fact, a lot of the open conflicts is to distract you from what's really going on. Here they are, the Fabian logo, and their other symbol of them shaping the world, beating the world with their Masonic hammers in the shape that they want it to be. And they do that through these people's champions, these charlatans. You just don't fall for this bad boy image. Sometimes it's legit, other times it's not. One of the words that they use for themselves secretly is exon. Did you know what that word really means? We know the word page means a servant of the crown, right, who runs back and forth doing the bidding of the royals. Actually, the real word for the ones who do the true bidding of the royals, for the inner court, is exon. That's what the word means. It also has, they've stylized it, made the double cross, because they're telling you who the royals are. The Cross of Lorraine, the Habsburg family, the Duc d'Orleans, the Grand Orient versions of Freemasonry. Where the symbol was plagiarized. Here it is in the ancient Phoenicians, the ones who taught all humanity what was up, not just a small elite. But the Duc de Lorraine, him and his brother, they are the true founders of the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt is just on the surface. The Masonic hand grips, pay attention to that. This is a very bizarre photograph. If somebody grabbed you by the back of the neck like that, I don't think you'd be too happy. And again, color has nothing to do with it, as we've now discovered. This is another sort of lie. You know. This can, anyone can convert to this, as we now have found out. It goes beyond all of the certain social and class divisions that we know about. Political slant is also meaningless, you see. These guys swing from communism to fascism in a heartbeat, only themselves to find out that it's all one and the same. Religious persuasion, meaningless, just another distraction. Don't believe it? Karl Marx worked with Friedrich Engels, who himself was a very wealthy industrialist who had little children down in the mines. Right? He ran mines in the north of England, Friedrich Engels. His name was on the Das Kapital book, not Karl Marx, for I think a period of 18 to 20 years, I'm not sure, but for years and years and years, Karl Marx's name didn't even appear on the Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto. This guy on the right was the funder of Marx, a Jewish industrialist who had little children down in the mines working their guts out to die at like 12 or 14 of that kind of oppressive work, and he's the champion of socialism. Wake up. Wake up and realize these conflicts are purely on the surface. See through the fix. And the court jester idea. In every court you have your jester who's permitted to parody, right, the goings on, and permitted to jibe at the king. He's permitted that. But he's still part of the court. That's to release the tension, but not to really affect real change. You dig a bit deeper, you find that they're all part of the same movement. They're all in bed together. Earlier we showed a picture of Zina LaVey. It turns out that actually she was the daughter of Anton LaVey, not the wife. And when I showed Debbie Harry, it's curious, I forgot to mention, but it's curious that one of her songs, quite popular song, was Sunday Girl. I said there's a striking resemblance between her and Tuesday Weld, and then we have this Days of the Week motif. Maybe nothing to it, but you never know. But basically, when it comes to conspiracies, we could be here for years proving that fact. I mean, it's not really debatable that these conspiracies exist in the world. You only have to ask the family of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who was forced to commit suicide by the Nazis because he and many other generals at the time started to twig what was going on. That ultimately, Hitler and many of the other leaders of the Nazi Party were not only funded from New York, but were basically in the pay of the British government. And anyone who would find that fact out, anybody who would find out that these people were not German for Germany or any of this nonsense, they were they were got rid of. They were compromised and politically and often physically assassinated. Go and ask the descendants of the Nicholas Romanov family who were executed that there's no such thing as conspiracy in the world, and the events that surround them. An intricate web of conspiracy. And also the fact that when they realized that finally Russia was lost to them, they petitioned their cousins and their direct blood kin in England, to let them come to England. And the British royal family refused to house the emperor. They refused to receive him and his family. So he had to stay in Russia and fall foul of the assassins, the Bolshevik assassins. Well, what's with that? Another interesting anecdote, because people are always asking, Michael, it's impossible, no secret society could just come in and take over the world. History tells us different. During the time of the Norman conquest, back in 1066, the famous Battle of Hastings and all of that, William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, by the time that the Normans had ensconced themselves in Britain, by the time that the famous Doomsday Book was compiled, and by the way, the Doomsday Book was a meticulous economic research of every single field, plot of land, and every animal. And the Doomsday Book recorded every animal owned in every farm down to the pig, down to the individual pig. This is back in the 11th century. That much precision. And behind them was the Vatican, of course. Literally going there to take an audit on exactly what was of wealth and of value in the land of England. And by the time that the Normans, as I say, were ensconced in England, did you know that the whole of England was owned by just 100 families? And half the country was owned by 11 families? 100 families owned England at the time of the Norman conquest, and half the country was in the control of only 11 ruling families. So, don't ever tell me that a small group can't come in and take over. Nothing could be easier. History already tells you the case. But when it comes to the situation of Russia, and many other fascinating details pertaining to Hitler and the true origin of the Nazis, always must recommend the works of Yuri Lina. Both his books, Under the Sign of the Scorpion, which is an absolute masterpiece on the subject, and he calls it Scorpion because he shows the astrological tie-in, the occult tie-ins, and how much was done during the sign of Scorpio and Sagittarius. An incredible book, also as Architects of Deception, in which he goes into the true origins, the family, and political orientation of the Nazis, who they really were. Who these real criminals were. And he himself was on the KGB hit list, and that's why he moved to Sweden to continue his phenomenal research. People should really check out his work and his DVDs as well. And he points out what should be obvious when you study the symbolism, that there's one cabal, left or right, as we've been saying numerous times now. The symbolism tells you that it's straight out of the same lexicon. It's almost their version of the Madison Avenue. And a meticulous study of Nazi symbolism is also a fascinating thing. I wish we had more time to go into that, because you'll find something very interesting. And that is that these so-called pagan, anti-Christian, almost atheistic people have symbols straight from the Bible, straight from the Old Testament, straight from the lexicon of Judaism and Kabbalism, and straight from the royal houses. Nazi regalia, a lot of this hasn't been seen, featured not only royal lions, but here's a belt buckle with God with us. It was God with us. That translates in Hebrew into Emmanuel, That's what the word Emmanuel in Hebrew means, God with me or God with us. Well, wait a minute, I thought on paper these guys were absolutely 100% against Christianity, and surely if you watched any portrayals of the Nazi party on the television, right, run by the media, and all those spectacles and pagan festivities and rites and rituals of Nazism, you'd imagine that they were contradictory, right, to anything to do with Christianity. But as a matter of fact, that's not true. Then you study the fact that the Vatican had a hand in saving the top Nazis and getting them out. That they were, as I said last time we met, that Mussolini was tied in with the Vatican, gave them back their papal states. Go to the regalia. The stuff that's been hidden is really fascinating. Hebrew, God with us. Straight out of the Bible, straight out of Jewish Old Testament tradition. Incredible. Here's, I say, the royal lions on the lapels. But, I mean, I've been saying it for years, that the very fact that they're using iron crosses, which eventually go back to the Knights Templars, or the oak leaves, you see, which are druidic and all of this. Swastikas, the runes, all going back to astrotheology. Again, emphasize again that behind the lodge door the divisions are meaningless. That's just for us. That's just the carnival. The head of the Order of Malta, he's dead now I think, but he was the 78th Grand Master, Andrew Bertie, is actually directly related to the Queen of England. Roman Catholic on one side, right, Knights of Malta, headquarters in the Vatican. Queen of England, Order of St. John, Order of the Garter, Order of the St. George and St. Michael, Protestant on the surface. They're the same family. It's the old Merovingians, the old Carolingians. They're a small group, so they have to use these things we're exploring because they know that they'd be wiped out. They know they have enemies. So they have made great use of all of these, of all of this wardrobe to keep us befuddled and amused. Edward Berman, in his book The Assassins, the Holy Killers of Islam, says that all revolutionaries and murderers since then have been part of a single Templar society, including Cromwell, the murderer of Henry IV of France, conspirators in Portugal, Brazil and Sweden, and of course Robespierre and Danton. They're from Switzerland, the headquarters of the Templars. There's even a city in Switzerland called Sion, after the old Order of Sion, you see. Cromwell, he's meant to be a Protestant. How did he get his armor? He defeated his enemy because he had better guns, weapons and armor. Who supplied it? Manasseh ben Israel, a Jewish banker who themselves, the Jews, had been banned from England, so he was ensconced in France and also Spain, and funded the Roundheads to overthrow King Charles so that they could get back into the country. But Cromwell on paper is meant to be a Protestant. These contradictions are very important. But coming back more to the Dionysian aspects of all of this, the fixation of the teen, the child, the sacrificial child, and the whole pedophilia network that goes with that is of great fascination to these people. Here's the tomb of Enrico Baccardi, Masonic obelisk. Same thing goes for Bronfman and many of the other families, you see, that control this, the drugs and the alcohol. Why use a vampire bat is worrisome enough as your logo, hiding behind the idea that they're philanthropists. Here's their headquarters in Porto, Portugal, featuring hellish-looking flames with 10 foot high, you know, a vampire bat in the middle. Go figure. But again, the symbolism tells us something, and the basically pornographic, debauched, suggestive advertising, you see, is part of this pestilence, is part of the psychic dictatorship, psychic tyranny we've been talking about. And these Bronfmans and Bacardis and what have you, here's Aaron Spelling, all these people in the media, they are rewarded with the billions that they have. And then with those monies they may go and design their houses to look like the vulture, the eagle, the Masonic, pyramidical designs. This is another interesting motif. But as I say, the Philip Morris using the royal logos, and Marlborough, of course, using the pyramid, all going back to the London. London is the center of all of this, center of the Templars, even though, again, on paper they look like Catholic, but that's just mostly a ruse. Here's the dragons around their emblem, the crest, for the Dragon Court. And the Corporation of London is actually a corporation, by the way, and they have all the protections that that type of status brings them. That Templar cross is on the Union Jack. There it is. In the center of the Union Jack, the red cross is a Templar cross. Now, of course, the Masons don't go around advertising that they're Masons. It's not Monty Python. They're not going to be doing weird handshakes in front of you on the street or funny walks. So then how do they actually let each other know? As we said, it's through all of their symbolism. How would you know otherwise if you weren't a member of the lodge? A lot of the statements that we use, like all fair and square, or I'm on the level, or you'll get a square deal here, have percolated down into modern, language, because they're actually Masonic, and there's many of these terms. All's fair and square, and so on. 3 square meals a day. All of this kind of verbiage. The handshakes, of course, are now familiar. But when you look at these rock videos and the new advertisements that come out, last time we showed a couple of examples, the blindfold and the rope, it's becoming more and more apparent in our mainstream daily life. As I said, go up there to Redbergsplatz and Cemetery and you'll see these elites, or their tombs. Very interesting symbolism up there, sphinxes and all sorts of things. It's a case of one rule for them, one rule for us. This percolates right down to the most basic level of the jobs you're going to get, the advancement that your children will get, or the lack of it. Here we have from the Los Angeles Times a particular situation, and it says here in the headlines, the head story about this conflict with street gangs and the police involved in it. It said, according to one source, district attorney officials do not plan to give these are the 3 policemen that were implicated, an opportunity to surrender themselves to authorities today. They're going to be arrested, the source said. They're not part of the Brotherhood. They are not part of any fraternity. They're going to be arrested like anyone else. It's the Los Angeles Times literally admitting, we're not going to give them a break. They're not part of the Masonic order. And they do it openly, not only to gain your support that you might join, which they're now doing. They've got campaigns all over the place to recruit new people, you see, to Masonry. But they're doing this to show you will be privileged. And we buy into it because we don't have any inner sovereignty, so we'll buy into all of this. And through this ad copy as well, they're letting you know. Here's some more examples of that. A handshake is a Masonic connection. Or socialism, which is nothing more than exoteric, socially presented Masonry. The Fabian network. And the gripping of the knuckle also signifies rank. There you see it again. It's a very specific handshake. You can notice it easily. I mean, it's almost laughable in a way. You think the Marx Brothers or something, but this matters. And it seduces so many people into this nonsense. Again, partly anthropologically we can understand it. The whole idea of a tribal group. Loyalty is a very high virtue. And so they prey upon this as well. By first getting your loyalty, there's a lot of emphasis on that you've given us your oath, you've given us your loyalty. And that's easy to manipulate in people. They're virtues. But as the great playwrights like Shakespeare and others have shown, it is often by your virtues that a hero is brought down, not his vices. And they work on this principle. Creating a whole network of pseudo-morality and pseudo-affiliation. Then we come to this very important symbol used by the Dionysian cult again, which is the butterfly. It's a code word for the sacrificial victim. Just like we saw with the Rolling Stones song Dandelion, is basically a play on that. And boy oh boy, the butterfly is just so ubiquitous. An incredible, of course it's a short-lived, highly beautiful, right? Creature, the butterfly. So there's a metaphor there. And it's found in a lot of women's symbolism. In the symbolism of a lot of female celebrities, you'll keep finding it. We saw that album cover last time we met, and that the symbol of the butterfly or the monarch butterfly literally directly refers to a specific kind of mind control that's used to disassociate the human mind. Basically, it would affect the long-term memory and things like that. There's a whole sub-study of that. Here it is around the eye again, the single eye. Here it is with Britney Spears. You see the butterfly and the solar rays. Or it can be done this way, through the gestures and hand gestures. And these so-called celebrities, pop stars, are right there next to the political figures. That also has become ubiquitous. They may dress like rebels. It's like I said, they've co-opted a lot of the imagery of iconoclastic genres of music. But they're hardly rebels in the true sense of the word, any more than Bob Geldof and his coterie were, you see. No, in fact, give them a couple of moments of fame, and the next minute they're up there, serenading the highest royals. People go, oh, well, that's just to make the royals look trendy. No, it's not. They don't care if they look trendy or not. It's something completely different. We looked at the Venusian symbol, because remember I said that the cult of Dionysus can also be referred to as a Venusian cult, based on both the positive and negative aspects of the symbols connected to Venus, one of which is Lucifer. Lucifer was in one school of thought, Lucifer and Venus were identical, both mythologically and astrologically. There's the butterfly symbol again, the arms, the spread of the arms. Another one that's used perpetually is the rainbow symbol. It not only pertains to a certain lodge within Freemasonry, which is known as the Rainbow Lodge, and that Rainbow Lodge is particularly joined by women. A lot of people think that Masonry doesn't have lodges for women. It does. It absolutely does. And one of them, I believe, is called the Rainbow Lodge, of a lodge for women. So when you see these Dionysian symbols in a setting in which the model is shown erotically, you see there's a lot more going on than we would first imagine. Whereas again, that's Anita Pallenberg, as I said, was very closely involved with the Rolling Stones. Or the supine, there's the cross that Madonna also used on the floor there. And just this general sort of supine, submissive, incompetent posing. It's quite common. There's the butterfly again and the solar rays. Enormously interesting symbolism. Symbol of the red rose, you'll find it in a lot of movies as well. I think when we showed the clip of the murder by decree on the desk of the Freemason, you saw the rose. It'll often be right there, but it'll be so obvious you won't notice it in a way. So the red rose, and the play on the numerology of the word rose, I mean, there's a lot of history, a lot of symbolism behind just the symbolism of the rose. I guess for our purposes it would connect to the Rosicrucians, a branch of Freemasonry. As I said, members of the Grateful Dead are frequent visitors of the Bohemian Grove. That's been confirmed. This is similar to the poster I was mentioning, but this is actually Joe Gallant. He's the arranger of the Grateful Dead songs like Blues for Allah. His separate band or separate poster also features the term Illuminati. Basically the guy that wrote a lot of the Grateful Dead songs. Here's another one in which it features an Egyptian obelisk, no less. And again, Illuminati is the term, the title of the album. Corporate logo using the rose. What's the rose got to do with technology? Until you understand the secret society levels of symbolism, it wouldn't make any sense. Here again. Here again. In this way, it's almost connected to the poppies. Poppies being opium. That's the psychedelic cult I'm talking about. Cult of Dionysus is nothing more than the drug cult, the mushroom cult of old, the Eleusinian cults of ancient times. And they have many, many agents. Here you see the Guns N' Roses logo, Guns and Roses. Doesn't mean anything until you look at it from a symbolic point of view. And the symbol of the cross and the skulls and crosses, those are Knights Templar symbols. Those are skull and bones symbols. or it can be sometimes very obvious, the pyramid. Here it is on Life magazine, the Freemasons photographed in a pyramidical shape. You see, that's what I'm saying. You turn around 5 minutes later, it's on some corporate ad. We never think anything of it. Here's Pizza Hut. Look at the symbolism. The ziggurat, the pyramid, and the sun, and the pentagram. Access Hollywood, pentagram, and the pyramid without the capstone. We looked at, was it Cartoon Network? Now you have Nickelodeon. It's one of the largest channels in American television for children, using all that occult symbolism. In fact, the children's world, as I said, is just absolute. We could do a whole thing on that. Here's Zelda, using the pyramid. Get them when they're young. You see, that's the whole concept. The Sacred Heart. Cartoons and all sorts of programs for the young is infested with this. Get them in the pre-rational state. There's the Eye of Horus, 3 pyramids, triangles. That's called the unicursal hexagram, I believe, which is not evil or anything like that. It's an occult symbol. They're drawing on a reservoir of occult symbolism, and we need to learn how to do that. Just to realize it doesn't belong to an individual or a group of individuals. But they get you young. I noticed this when I was a child. On the bubble gum, they attract kids by saying, join our magic circle club. It can be literally as innocuous as that. The seduction can be in the most simplistic ways that you'd never ever, really think about. It could be right in front of you. But how are they seducing the child mind to get into occultism? This is always interesting. This is one example. The symbolism is used a lot, though, of the Black Pyramid and the sun, and then the Serpentine River. As a matter of fact, Tony Bushby, the author, actually suggested there was a Black Pyramid on the Plateau of Giza. It was later taken down, and he writes about the Black Pyramid that was there. And we find that pyramid on the Nazi regalia as well. Sometimes it's a combination. The checks, the solar rays, you see the butterflies, it can be a combination. The black and the white girl, which is the syzygy, straight out of Celtic Irish mythology, going back thousands and thousands of years ago. You find it in all the Celtic countries, the dark twin and the light twin and their conflict. That's purely mythological. And if you actually knew about the myths that are involved, it ties into music, it ties into the symbolism of pretty much like you see in things like Snow White, of the evil grandmother, and there's so many ties in, and our subconscious mind sees that. It understands what the symbolism is there, pertaining even to the different aspects of the mind. But of course, we often don't notice that something's up, or at least the masses don't, until there's some sort of breakdown. And that breakdown can be in a multiplicity of ways. A slow decline through alcoholism and just being shunted aside, while the new generation of models comes up and you feel eclipsed, and then the person's faith in the system breaks down. They start becoming sort of demented and breaking the silence. Or it can be a much more sudden and bizarre breakdown. But until it becomes a scandal, most of our attention is never really attracted to the underpinnings of any of this until it becomes a scandal, and then that sort of part of our mind gets interested in it. One of the most important parts of this, though, is the breakdown of the dissociation, the fragmentation, and the split character. And that's even picked up in the ad copy. Never forgetting that the mind control is in itself a kind of a temporary thing, and also never forgetting that these champions, the ones that are used, are expendable. That's why. None of them have any shelf life. And the first moment that something goes awry, they'll be deleted from concern or compromised, so that people think, oh, they're kooks, and then some other person comes, like Paul Simon said, another hero up the pop charts, But again, the ad copy alone is telling you something about the split, schizoid nature of what's going on. This is coming in more and more, even in the videos that are used. We'll finish off by pulling back from the canvas again to remind ourselves how this all comes into being. Why is this cult using this power? I mean, we can't sit here and go into a huge story about, the cognitive mind and the subconscious mind and whether or not even subliminal persuasion, works or not. I have to keep it strictly about the fact that I don't want you to assume it, but I want you to research it, but to take on board the power that this kind of persuasion has. But also that power works two ways. They're using it on us, but we can return it. We can take the power back, because the moment that you are aware of what these people are doing, they only have a certain limited weaponry, by the way. It's very powerful, as you can see. And it is also ubiquitous. But the thing is that once you become aware of it, just your simple awareness, they've lost their power. That's it. It doesn't work on the person who knows what it is. Not in a contemptuous way, well, I think it's rubbish, so I don't listen to it. No, your mind is wide open. You have to have an empowered understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. Know thine enemy, says the Bible, right? Very true. And know the weapons that the enemy is also using. But the moment that you do, you gain the psychic immunity that stops their power. That's it. It's psychological warfare. You can't raise up arms against these people. They're ready for you. It's too crazy. They know how that game works. But this is the way that you understand it. Once you've cracked the secret, you see, then you have the sword that cuts the Gordian knot of all the other complications. The point was made about symbolism by the Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle, who said that by symbols is man guided and commanded, made happy, made wretched. He everywhere finds himself surrounded with symbols, recognized as such or not recognized. And that is the loophole that this particular cult of sorcerers have used. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but there you have it. Who are these people? Well, they are ideologically, I would even go so far as to say biologically, but certainly ideologically connected, by the way, to ancient sorcerers of the ancient world, particularly a group known as the Medes, or at least the people who have plagiarized the knowledge of the Medes in the same way that the knowledge of the Druids and the Omanists was also plagiarized. But there's actually, the word Media comes from a group of people known as the Media, or the Medes, a very, very ancient group that was ensconced up in a place called Medea. Words like Medic and Medici comes from these terms. It's a place not far from Parthia or Persia. And these were the astrologers, the wise ones, the geomancers, the healers, the apothecaries that the kings of the world called on when you wanted to deal with your enemies, when you wanted to put the spell on them. The word Medea is found in mythology as a female. She was actually related physically to Circe in mythology, and she herself was a murderess and a hypnotist that hypnotized people with drugs. Go and study Medea, M-E-D-E-A, the goddess who hypnotized people using drugs to put them into complete delirium. She's actually related to Circe, another goddess known to turn men into pigs. Right? And now there was actually 6 tribes within. I have an article, this one, that you can look at, History of the Medes. It's just a compilation of information that I found on the Medes. There were 6 tribes of the Medes, and the most powerful of the tribes was called Magi. That's where the word comes from magician. Is actually the name of a tribe within the Median peoples, where the word magus comes from. And the word actually meant rich, powerful, high, intelligent, and it really represented men who are like the highest ones, the high men of the world, the ones overlooking, the ones who've got the great knowledge, the great teachers. And if you read this little article I put up there, I go into those 6 and give the names. They're Aryan. There's a lot of Arya tie-in there. Another fascinating subject. The Medes. Their knowledge is what is behind the Holy Wood, which is very similar to Holy Rood, a place in Scotland run by the Templars. And I believe it's not that these Medes are still alive, but these great groups, whether they're Mithraic, Amonist, Druidic, Chaldean, Chaldean, their knowledge is what is being misused now. You see what I'm saying? Masonry, these organizations are corrupt because they're using sacred knowledge that was for the uplift of all people for a specific elite, for a specific purpose. The knowledge doesn't belong to them, but they're misusing it. This kind of knowledge knows things that we're not supposed to know. They took this route to use subversive symbolism to manipulate us because they understand the workings of the brain. They understand that there's 37 sensory inputs to the brain, not 5. Well, what's happening with those other senses? Well, didn't we hear R.D. Laing last time? Any so-called abnormal function or behavior or experience is now going to be considered a mark of insanity or dementia. Everything's going to be homogenized. So is our consensus reality. Don't anthropologists know that a habitat of an animal right outside its purview, that animals can be trained, their habitat can be changed on the periphery of their vision, that they haven't the faintest idea what's going on? But slowly the behavior of that animal will be changed because its habitat has been changed. Not all training, you see, is direct. Not all puppets are on strings. And they understand the esoteric, and that's what you find. The use of the wand, the use of the lantern, the use of the sword, the use of these remarkable symbols that you find all throughout the royal families and their connection to the human being is a remarkable study. The whole of Egypt, as the great Swallow de Lubitsch pointed out, was designed to emulate and to simulate the subtle energy of the body, which again it ties into music and all sorts of other phenomena. Then we have the same gang, as they start to misuse this symbolism. Oh, we can't have it for everybody. Wow, this really has a lot of power. Shit, what are we going to do? So then you have the prohibition in the Bible against graven images that comes before the prohibition against murder, right? The prohibition against graven images is before the prohibition against killing people. Can you imagine how important this was to them? Exodus 20, thou shalt not make for yourself a graven image. And Leonard Slane points this out in his book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess. The second commandment forbids Israelites from conveying any iconic information. No illustrations, no colorful drawings, and no art. So far as we know, there has never before existed a culture that forbade representative art. Why should a prohibition against making images be the second most important rule for righteous living? According to the Ten Commandments, art, therefore, is more dangerous than murder. I hope we've been pointing out why. It's because they wanted the arsenal for themselves. Take it out of the hands of humanity. Take it out of the shaman. Take it out of the true keepers of truth. And hoard it for yourself because you've got an agenda. Jerry Mander says the same thing. The Hebrews, emerging between 3000 and 2000 BC, won an important political victory by denouncing what they called the worship of graven images. By destroying the power of the sculptures of the Sumerians and others who preceded them, they effectively destroyed nature-based religion and the veracity of images. Biologically, it means, and psychologically, they close off a whole part of your brain. They want to put a wall between the left and the right brain, is basically what happened, between the masculine and the feminine capacities. That's how you control, isn't it? Divide and conquer, right? In this sign you will conquer. This made possible, he says, the substitution of an abstract, single, male, human, all-powerful God, because it was a sin to create any sculpture of it. It maintained its abstract nature. And so much can be said of this. It's like cutting off your hands. They're cutting off one part of your brain because they're going to control what's left by using this powerful symbolism that is archival. It's absolutely in your race memory, going back to the connection that you have directly with nature, to the stars. Everything in religion, I don't give a damn if it's Protestant or Catholic, comes from astrotheology, the history and the study of the stars. And that is in the deepest reservoir of your unconscious. And while you're tapped into that gnosis, you can't be controlled. So they have to put those barriers up. They have to put those electrical fences up so that they block and canalize that imagination body. It's going to be very important, because when we look at solutions in a minute, this is the way forward once you've understood it. But first of all, if poison has been pouring into your home, you can't start the cleaning up process until you shut the door on the sewer, isn't it? So this is what we're doing. You're going to do the cleanup through your life. But you first have to make sure that the poison doesn't keep pouring in. So the immunity that you get from understanding what these characters are up to immediately shuts down the process. You're completely onto it critically. That closes the door, and then the cleanup is even easier. There really are no other remedies. the great philosopher from Germany, Leibniz, it is a great source of error to believe that there is no perception in the soul besides those of which it is conscious. He's before Freud, talking 1700s here, 18th century, already understood. Pascal even had spoken of the same things. Schopenhauer, about how the brain is just besieged with all of the stimuli. The opponents, as we said, they know what we're never supposed to know. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, he said, this is the secret of propaganda. Those who are to be persuaded by it should be completely immersed in the ideas of the propaganda without ever noticing that they are immersed in it. Remember the comments of Edward Bernays, the modern mind controllers and persuaders? I'll leave you with this for this section by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. This incredible statement by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, by the way, was the prodigy of Gerald Massey, the great Scottish Egyptologist. And Alvin Boyd Kuhn says, hypnotism need not be induced by overt manipulation or by an operative. One can hypnotize oneself, and the agency can be a suggestion, a philosophy, a persuasion, a conviction, a belief, an infatuation, a book, a sermon, a piece of music, a personality, an addiction of any kind. Hold a conviction long enough, and it ends by holding you. Now we know it as obsession and what have you. If you really take this to the full extent of what he's saying, thinking itself is a primal addiction. We spoke before about Heidegger not even using the word consciousness to describe the thought of most people. And the idea is that over time, and I believe that's what we're seeing right now, is that because of this pestilence, and this is one of the things in the armory of the sorcerers, they knew that by purveying this for years and years and years, this slow drip feed method, that in the end, man would auto-hypnotize himself. Demons may lead you to the brink of the precipice, but they actually can't make you jump. You do that yourself out of fear, and then they have the last laugh. If you're out of your power, you're the victim of anything. A small breeze can topple an oak tree, if that oak tree is not properly, rooted. Because in the in the personality of human beings, it's a simple axiomatic fact of psychology that your psyche, in order to grow high, right, like a great tree, you must at the same time be sinking your roots deeply into the earth. And that means into yourself, into your own soil, into the soil of truth and reality. Otherwise you may grow very high and then it's, what? Catastrophe. And when you fall, you don't just destroy yourself, you take half the forest with you.